We're here today with Michael Granzen. Michael is a writer and activist with a call to transformational teaching and ministry. He grew up in New York before going to Colgate University and studying philosophy and religion with Coleman Brown. He worked as a community organizer in Boston and in Oklahoma, then went to Harvard Divinity School. He was ordained in the Presbyterian Church USA and has worked in multiple cities in the United States and Scotland. He studied social ethics at Drew University and received a PhD with honors in 2011. He's lectured at Harvard, Drew, Colgate, Princeton, and at New Brunswick and Princeton Theological Seminaries. He moderated the ordination of Chris Hedges, with James Cone and Cornel West giving the charges. He's actively involved in interfaith work for justice and is co-founder of the New Jersey Clergy for Justice. His new book is Breaking Through the Plate Glass Window, Prophetic Fragments, on doing justice and loving kindness in a time of reckoning. Michael lives in New Jersey with his wife, the Reverend Karen Hernandez Granzen, pastor of Westminster Presbyterian Church in Trenton. And also, I have to say that I'm particularly happy to interview someone like Michael, who is an alum of our conferences. So, Michael, congratulations on all your work, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. And as I said 2 years ago when we did our interview with the Coleman Brown book, those conferences really helped. It's like at a moment in time when you need encouragement and wisdom, they did that for me. So here we are.
Well, it's been a real blessing to do the conferences and to get to meet people like you, that are doing such incredible, wonderful work. So very glad that our cross a path multiple times now.
Amen.
So, I kind of touched on your background, but you've done so many different things. I mean, can you kind of capture that a little bit for us?
Well, yeah, when I graduated from Colgate, I started out as a community organizer, and I did what was called a training organizing drive in Roxbury, Massachusetts, and then it was very challenging. And my first boss was David Clossie, who was a hard-driving but excellent supervisor. David later became the head of a survivors network of those who were abused by priests. And David has been a friend over the years. And I mentioned him in the book, some of that collaboration. And I went out to Oklahoma after that. And I had a very good experience there for almost a year, working on issues of healthcare and medical care with North Tulsa, which was both a African-American community and a more low-income white community. And then eventually I circled back and I went to Harvard Divinity and went into South Boston, which was kind of going into the fire. And yet some wonderful partners and collaborators from both Protestant, Catholic, Muslim communities. And I tell some of the stories of what happened there in the book. And then eventually I came down here after going to Iona. Sometimes you need a little retreat, right? And I ended up having a good 6 months there in Iona, Scotland. As they say, it's kind of a thin place between heaven and earth. And so I pulled together some of the fragments of my own philosophy of religion and my own social ethics while there. I was about 31 then, 30. And then I came here to New Jersey, where I've been for a while.
Of all places, we both ended up in Central.
Yes, yeah. And so I just have a lot of gratitude, getting through this pandemic the last 2 years, I know is for many of us very, very challenging. And I had lost my brother, Dennis. My younger brother, Dennis, died right before the pandemic started. And that gave me a renewed sense of urgency to do the work, one is called to do while here on this earth. So one of the pieces I felt was to pull together this book. And having had some little bit of confidence building with the Coleman Brown book, Our Hearts Are Restless Until They Rest in Thee, and I helped edit that with Lisa Masada. And Coleman was really my mentor and teacher for many years. And then I sat down and I started writing this book and pulling together some pieces that I think needed to be pulled together.
Hmm.
Some writings from the past, and then collaborators, like excellent people like Tracy West, who was my teacher at Drew of social ethics, and she's just so outstanding as a teacher and activist. And then, of course, Chris Hedges, who's done wonderful work in journalism and writing, and now in prison ministry.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then my wife, Karen Hernandez Granzen, telling the story about her church.
Hmm.
And that's been a transformational church in Trenton. And so forth. Richard Fenn, who wrote a wonderful, it's almost like the moment for America in Gethsemane, especially for white folks in America to begin to say, thy will be done, not my will. And then Mike Geekin, who's been a tremendous organizer with the Industrial Areas Foundation, and my friend Lorna Goodison, who recently stepped down as Poet Laureate of Jamaica.
Wow.
And she wrote a poem in connection with the homeless in Boston. And then finally, Archangel Antoine, who just graduated from Princeton Seminary. And he was the elected head of the student government there. And he's also the political director of the New Jersey Clergy Network for Justice. So I have an all-star team.
I guess so.
I'm thankful.
So let's talk about different pieces of this. So one is the title of the book. What exactly does that mean?
Okay, that's a hard.
It's a very long title for one thing.
You threw me a fastball early on. Okay, breaking through the plate glass window. I take that from W.E.B. Du Bois in his autobiography, and he's talking about that which separates and oppresses African Americans in America. We could call it the racialized other, or that division that was started early in the country, and I call it seeds of destruction. And how to begin to break through that plate glass window and seek racial justice in solidarity. And so it's about my own experience with tremendous partners and colleagues, because it's really about solidarity, and my own having to learn in humility and a kind of repentance, how white supremacy gets into your head and white privilege. And then it's also about doing justice and loving kindness, kind of how to respond together on many levels, including the exploitation of the poor. So looking through the lens of class as well. And then, some others like Tracy West have looked through the lens of gender. And through these partnerships, when I was writing the book, I realized my own limitation. So I said, I need to learn from others, as I have over this journey. So that's why I especially wanted Tracy and Lorna and my wife, among others, to contribute, which there's a saying, I think, in the Presbyterian Church when they ask, how are you? And I'm saying, I'm better than I deserve. Meaning, it's these gifts of grace.
Well, you've got some incredible people that, contributed to this book. I mean, which, I'm really glad to see. But, what's that like, to have people like that involved in the project?
Well, I think it's challenging because if you read, for example, the preface by Tracy West and the introduction by Chris, they're both just great writers.
Yeah,
So then you have to step up to the plate and do, if somebody said to me once, do the best you can, nothing more, but nothing less. So I'm learning to write. I've been preaching and teaching for many years. So as I'm learning to write, and you learn by doing, and claiming your own voice and telling the truth from your point of view. So that's what it's like. It's being challenged in a good way.
Well, I was kind of lucky. It's like, I pulled together the How to Heal Our Divides books, with a bunch of different folks, but, I didn't hardly write anything myself. So I didn't have the same standard that I had to live up to that you do in your case. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that. I got lucky. I copped out, I
Oh,
guess.
okay. Well, I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing, Brian, because like I said, you strengthen and encourage and apprentice us. So keep on keeping on. And I look forward to your book too.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So, obviously pulling together a book like this is a lot of work. I mean, what inspired you to do this particular book?
Uh, well, I guess the question that I pose, the book has three sections: biographical fragments, which is about experience, and some parables or narratives of those experiences in Boston, Iona, and New Jersey. But then it's a historical, ethical investigation. How did the Confederate flag get in the front window of the Presbyterian Church on Lincoln's birthday in 1993? Because I had just come down from Boston, and it was put in the front window with a American flag and a picture of Abraham Lincoln. And so I used that as my question. How did this happen? I mean, and so it's really about the trajectory beginning in, the 1620s when the Dutch first came here, but then continuing as the English came in 1664 and the development of chattel slavery in New Jersey and in America. And so I kind of, in my own way, research and tell the story, again, in collaboration and partnership. And I should say, my wife, Karen Hernandez-Granzen, taught me a lot because she's Puerto Rican background. And over the years in our conversations and dialogue, it has deepened and expanded my own understanding, which is I'm still learning. And then it comes into the civil rights era. And I learned the flag was first put in there with the American flag in 1963. Why? Because African Americans were claiming their truth and power for equality and protesting in Elizabeth. So it was like a backlash, quote, a white backlash. It was an expression in the church, though.
Wow.
So I look at how religion and race have intersected and how, white racism got in the church early on, white Christianity early on. And so I talk about then going into the post-civil rights era and different expressions of white racism. And so, I could keep going, but, you can read the book.
Well, I guess the question that next comes up is, how do you feel that all of that's relevant for today?
Well, I think just opening up the newspaper, so to speak, is the old saying, hold the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other. I think the racialized policing and the shooting of our unarmed, particularly Black men, by the police, that's continued to happen even after the Black Lives Matter movement. I think it's expressed in trying to limit voting rights in specific states. And I think it's also in the kind of gun violence today. There was extraordinary violence. You see, this is part of that middle section. It took extraordinary violence that often we have, quote, forgotten to maintain this system of white supremacy, even after slavery, during Jim Crow. The lynchings and the state-sponsored violence that has developed then into mass incarceration. So this extraordinary violence that is expressed in different ways today is also very relevant. But I would also say, again, coming in from the other angles, then anger, how do we respond in a way that has both effectiveness? And I see Dr. King early in my life when I was at Colgate. I read King. I saw some films on Dr. King, and it was a part of my own spiritual awakening to see his life and the way he kind of had to let go and let God in his leadership,
Mm.
and was martyred.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, but I saw Dr. King, some of his last words when he was in Memphis had to do with what does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself. So that became the ethical mandate or focus of loving your neighbor as yourself, both practically, because the neighbor who's in the ditch, and sometimes that may be you or me, but it's particularly in America, the poor and often African Americans, but you need effectiveness, but that's not always possible. So it also must include planting seeds of hope, faith, and love.
So let's talk about the book process itself. What was it like? What did you learn from, the writing that yourself did, the exploration, the working with the other folks?
Well, what I learned, to really write a book, you need to get up early. For me, at least, I needed to get up early, more or less at dawn, and then write through to around lunchtime.
Huh. Wow.
And do that at least 3 to 5 days a week.
Hmm.
And I actually, like I said, after my brother Dennis passed, I started getting up in January, that was 2020, and writing. And I wrote all the way through June.
Hmm.
And again, I had to bracket my critical editorial voice in order to allow the writing to happen. And there was a sense of accepting imperfection, and then after that, collaborating with others, having folks read the book who were, good writers and had published different books, people like Chris Hedges and Lorna Goodison and others. And then so rewriting. And I see it a little bit like putting puzzle pieces together. And there still may be one or two missing, but that's okay.
Well, that's great
Yeah.
that you had those kinds of collaborators to basically, read through, the rest of the book and help with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I think, it's not just about study and writing. It's about doing justice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that other side, I see the book as an encouragement for people to strengthen the muscles. Like Mike Eakin talks about, it's a muscle that can atrophy, meaning if we don't do justice and loving kindness, we lose the ability to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes it starts with just little steps, but if you do it and you get your strength with others, again, it's about solidarity.
Hmm.
You get better at it, and so I'm thankful for, in both Elizabeth and in New Jersey, the Clergy Network for Justice, and I have many folks in Elizabeth that I work with and partner with. We strengthen one another.
Cool. So looking forward, I know you're already working on a new book, even though you're right in the midst of launching this one. Can you talk about that at all yet or not?
Yeah, well, the next one I think goes, I'm going to call it Travels with Charlie, which I know John Steinbeck had that title, but this is my own journey for the first 20, 25 years, where I grew up in an extraordinary community in Hartsdale. We used to say Hartsdale and Westchester, New York, which was also connected to Greenburgh. And it was a multiracial community and school system. And my neighbors included Vernon Jordan and Moms Mabley and the children of Jackie Robinson and a whole range of people, some of whom had just moved up from the Bronx. And it was a little glimpse, I think, at its best, of Dr. King's dream. for America.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of recovering some of those experiences and narratives in relation to the present moment.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
yeah, again, there's, I think, a vocational calling sometimes to do something and do it the best you can and then let go and let God.
So besides writing, are there any other new projects that you're focusing on?
Well, up in Elizabeth, my church, Second Press, has joined together with Siloam Hope First in partnership. And we have Chris Hedges, who's doing prison ministry part-time. And we have Dr. Wanda Lundy, who's the pastor there of Siloam Hope First. And we have Linwood Bagby, who's the new part-time young adult minister, along with myself. So we have a great team. And we're trying to, again, plant these seeds of hope, not just in terms of a church development, but in the community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we recently decided the second Saturday in October, we're going to have a bike-a-thon fundraiser just to get it out there. And the plan now is to bicycle from the ferry in Elizabeth, that's going to be going to Pier 15 in Manhattan, and then do about 10-mile ride and then come back.
Oh,
And
wow.
so,
That's cool. That's innovative.
raise some resources for these ministries in Elizabeth.
Cool. Cool. Well, when you're ready to publicize that, let me know, and I hope you get the word out about it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
So again, the title of Michael's new book is Breaking Through the Plate Glass Window, Prophetic Fragments on Doing Justice and Loving Kindness in a Time of Reckoning. You can learn more about it at Whitman-Stock or on Amazon. Michael, again, thanks so much for all of your work and for joining us to share about this latest book.
Thank you, Brian, and many blessings to you and your work.
Okay, same to you.
Thanks.